The year was 1991. The Soviet Union, a superpower that had dominated half the world, was crumbling. Its collapse sent shockwaves across its vast territory. Republics that had been bound together for decades began to break away. In the Caucasus Mountains, a small republic called Chechnya saw its chance. A former Soviet Air Force general named Dzhokhar Dudayev stepped onto the political stage. He was charismatic and determined. He declared Chechnya an independent nation, the Chechen Republic of Ichkeria. In Moscow, the new Russian government, led by Boris Yeltsin, was struggling. The country was in chaos. Yeltsin watched the events in Chechnya with growing alarm. The economy was failing and political stability was fragile. He could not afford to let Chechnya go. He feared it would create a domino effect. If Chechnya seceded, other regions might follow. The Russian Federation itself could unravel. For Yeltsin, holding on to Chechnya was a matter of national survival. In December 1994, Boris Yeltsin lost his patience. He ordered the Russian army to invade Chechnya. He expected a quick and decisive victory. His generals told him it would be over in a matter of days. They called it a short, victorious war. They believed their overwhelming military power would crush the Chechen resistance easily. Thousands of young, poorly trained Russian conscripts were sent into a conflict they did not understand. They were not prepared for the ferocity of the fight that awaited them. The Russian advance on the Chechen capital Grozny was a disaster. Chechen fighters led by commanders like Dzhokhar Dudayev and Shamil Basayev knew every street and alley. They were highly motivated, fighting for their homes and their independence. Russian tanks, designed for open battlefields, were vulnerable in urban warfare. They were picked off one by one. The New Year's Eve assault on Grozny became a symbol of the Russian military's failure. The war turned Grozny into a wasteland, described by the United Nations as the most destroyed city on Earth. Civilians were caught in the crossfire. They huddled in basements without food, water, or electricity. The humanitarian cost was immense. Tens of thousands of people were killed. Hundreds of thousands were forced to flee their homes, becoming refugees in their own land. The stories from this period are filled with horror and loss. The war dragged on for nearly 2 years. In 1996, with a presidential election looming, Yeltsin was forced to seek a way out. A peace agreement was signed. Russian troops withdrew from Chechnya. The rebels had won. The peace that followed the First War was fragile and chaotic. Chechnya was a shattered land. The government, now led by Aslan Maskhadov, had little real power. In this vacuum, power fell into the hands of warlords. Men like Shamil Basayev, who had been heroes of the war, now controlled their own private armies. They carved up the country into personal fiefdoms. Law and order completely collapsed. Kidnapping for ransom became a major industry. Foreign aid workers, journalists, and even ordinary Chechens were abducted and held in brutal conditions. The character of the Chechen resistance also began to change. The dream of a secular, independent state started to fade. It was replaced by a more radical and extreme form of Islam. Foreign jihadist fighters, drawn by the conflict, brought their own ideologies to the region. They found fertile ground among a generation of young men who had known nothing but war and despair. In Moscow, a new leader was watching these developments closely. Vladimir Putin, a former intelligence officer, had risen to become prime minister. He saw the chaos in Chechnya as a direct threat to Russia's security. The trigger for the Second War came in the summer of 1999. Shamil Basayev, along with an Arab jihadist commander named Ibn al-Khattab, led a force of Chechen fighters into the neighboring Russian Republic of Dagestan. Then, something even more terrifying happened. In September 1999, a series of powerful explosions ripped through apartment buildings in several Russian cities, including Moscow. Hundreds of sleeping civilians were killed in their homes. Vladimir Putin, who was then prime minister, seized the moment. He projected an image of strength and resolve. He famously vowed to hunt down the terrorists and waste them in the outhouse. The Russian military machine was unleashed in late September 1999. The invasion was massive and methodical. This was not the disorganized army of 1994. Airstrikes and heavy artillery pounded Chechen towns and villages for weeks before the ground troops moved in. The strategy was simple: destroy everything from a distance to minimize Russian casualties. The world saw images of columns of refugees fleeing the bombardment. They carried what little they could, their faces etched with fear. For the people on the ground, it was total war. One of the most infamous attacks occurred in October 2002. A group of about 40 Chechen militants, including female suicide bombers known as Black Widows, stormed the Dubrovka Theater in Moscow during a packed performance. They took more than 850 people hostage. Their leader demanded the immediate withdrawal of Russian forces from Chechnya. The Moscow theater siege lasted for 3 days. The standoff ended when Russian special forces pumped an unknown chemical gas into the theater to incapacitate the terrorists. At least 130 of the hostages died, not from terrorist bullets, but from the effects of the gas used by their rescuers. An even more monstrous attack followed less than 2 years later. On September 1, 2004, the first day of school, a group of militants seized a school in the town of Beslan, in the neighboring Republic of North Ossetia. They took more than 1,100 people hostage, most of them children. The conditions inside the school gymnasium were hellish. The hostages were packed together, denied food and water, and surrounded by explosives. The siege lasted for 3 terrifying days, culminating in a chaotic and bloody storming of the school by Russian forces. Over 330 people were killed, including 186 children. The horror of Beslan shocked the world and traumatized Russia. By the late 2000s, the wars were officially over. The Chechen rebel leadership had been systematically eliminated. Aslan Maskadov was killed in 2005, Shamil Basayev was killed in 2006. Russian federal control was firmly restored. Chechnya remained part of the Russian Federation, but the victory came at a staggering humanitarian cost. The exact number of casualties is still disputed, but it is estimated that tens of thousands of civilians and tens of thousands of combatants on both sides were killed. The 2 wars left a deep wound on the Chechen people. Today, Chechnya is a land of contradictions. On the surface, it is peaceful and stable. Grozny has been transformed into a modern city with gleaming skyscrapers, wide avenues, and one of Europe's largest mosques. But this peace is maintained by the authoritarian rule of Ramzan Kadyrov. He governs Chechnya as his personal domain, with a notorious record of human rights abuses including torture, abductions, and extrajudicial killings. Loyalty to Kadyrov and to Vladimir Putin is absolute. Dissent is not tolerated. It is a peace built on fear, a silence enforced by a powerful security apparatus. The legacy of the Chechen Wars is complex and haunting. It is a story of a fierce struggle for independence that descended into terrorism and extremism. It is a story of a Russian state that used overwhelming and brutal force to maintain its territorial integrity. For the people who lived through it, the wars are not a distant historical event. The scars remain, both on the landscape and in their hearts. Chechnya today is a testament to the brutal cost of conflict, a place where a fragile, imposed peace has been built upon the ruins of a bloody and tragic war. The echoes of that war still reverberate, a quiet reminder of the price of defiance and the cost of control.